Welcome to everyone to this forum on Palestine and Ukraine, Unite the Struggles, sponsored by the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign. My name is Cheryl Zur. I'm one of the two co-chairs of the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign. John Ryman is the other co-chair, and he will be saying a few things in just a few minutes. I wanted to tell you a little bit about...
Please
mute yourself.
Wanted to tell you a little bit, especially for those of you who don't know much about us and who are joining us for the first time at one of our forums. We formed in the spring of 2022, right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We formed to be part of the international movement in solidarity with Ukraine. And we had two essential tasks. One was to build solidarity with Ukraine through material aid in as many ways as we could, to reach out to working class people, to trade unions, but also to combat the disinformation and the propaganda coming from Russia and other sources that unfortunately led the left to abandon the Syrian revolution, to condemn the Ukrainian resistance as nothing but a proxy war on the part of the United States, to deny the genocide on the part of China against the Uyghurs, and other problems. So we from the beginning, we have one of our primary tasks has been to combat disinformation. And those two central challenges have stayed the same. And now we find ourselves in this new, very sobering situation where Israel is conducting a massive genocide of Palestine. So, and as far as we know, we are the only Ukraine solidarity organization that has taken an unequivocal stand in solidarity with Palestine. We hope that others will join us soon, because it is absolutely critical to unite these two struggles. So we look forward to getting to know all of you, especially those of you that have never participated in one of our meetings before, and working together to build a movement that will actually stand for consistent international solidarity with all oppressed peoples, regardless of the perpetrator. Excuse me. Our points of unity, there'll be different things that be posted in the chat. Our points of unity, our link tree, other pieces of information, and ways to get in touch with us. So John, why don't you explain how the meeting will go and introduce the speakers?
Okay, so first of all, we're going to have two main speakers. One is Dana El-Kurd, who is a senior non-resident fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, and she's also the author of the book, Polarized and Demobilized: Legacies of Authoritarianism in Palestine. The other main speaker will be Vladislav Starobudstev, who's a longtime socialist activist in Ukraine, and he's a student of Ukrainian history and the history of Eastern Europe. We're also going to have a third speaker those two speakers will present for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then we'll have a third speaker who will make a presentation of maybe about 5 to 10 minutes or so. Ofer Neiman, who is in Israel, he's a longtime anti-apartheid and Palestinian rights activist in Israel itself. A couple points on how this forum is organized. We don't do like webinars or teach-ins where a few people speak and everybody else listens. We think that having an exchange of ideas amongst as many people as possible is really essential. And so for that reason, we do have open discussion. Because of the number of people in the meeting, we think that the people that speak from the floor, so to speak, will have to confine themselves to about 2 minutes each. And we are going to be giving priority to people from Ukraine and also to people from North Africa and Southwest Asia. Finally, regarding the use of the chat, that people are free to do what they like with it, but just bear in mind that it can be very distracting, and especially when the main speakers speak, please use it sparingly. So those are the main points about how the meeting goes. So with that, Cheryl? Cheryl?
Yeah, Dana, would you like to start, and would you like a time check at about 15 minutes or not? Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Excuse me, I doubt that I'll go that long.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you all for the invitation. It's always interesting to talk to folks around the country from not in the academic bubble. So I appreciate the invitation. So I don't want to presume a level of knowledge, but at the same time, there's like so much to cover that I obviously won't cover everything in 15 minutes, and I'm going to leave a lot to the Q&A and to the chat to let me know like what points of information is most useful. I will just begin by stating what's going on right now, just like a quick overview. So on October 7th, Hamas breached the militarized fence and conducted an attack that killed 1,400 and took 200 or so hostages. It's not, I haven't seen like 100% clear how many, but over 200, I believe. And then in the immediate aftermath, Israel began an attack on Gaza that until as of this morning has killed over 8,000 people, and 3,200 of those were children. Almost 50% of all homes have been destroyed or damaged across the Gaza Strip. There have also been a number of international organizations that have documented things like white phosphorus bombs and targeting of civilians. So that also amounts to war crimes, and it's just an unprecedented level of destruction and death. Now, this particular attack and this particular escalation is the 6th major assault on Gaza since 2008. So 6 times in that time frame, we have seen something like this, but this time is at a much escalated pace and level of destruction. So in terms of, like I said, I don't want to presume knowledge, but in the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about the process and the political dynamics that led to the blockade of Gaza even before October 7th. So now we have like kind of a very extreme siege, but even before October 7th and the Hamas attack, we had a blockade on Gaza. So I can talk about that. I can also talk about how Hamas, as a political actor, relates to other political actors in the Palestinian political sphere. And any and all questions obviously are welcome. But I think it's maybe more useful in my short time allocated to talk about some of the myths around this conflict, and to talk about the topic of this discussion, which is like, how do we show solidarity to one another and things like this. So a couple myths. I apologize if maybe this is too simple, so bear with me. But one is that I think, especially in like mainstream media, especially in Western mainstream media, there is this like conflation of what's happening today, a modern political conflict with some sort of ancient conflict between Jews and Muslims, and a pitting of like Judeo-Christian civilization against not Judeo-Christian civilization. And obviously this is not the case. This is a modern conflict related to the formation of a nation state as an organizing principle, and a modern conflict born out of European anti-Semitism. So what this is essentially 2 budding nationalisms. One, the Zionist movement born out of European anti-Semitism, and one born out of anti-colonial struggle, the Palestinian national movement, in the same place. And again, if people want to talk about that, we could talk about that. But another myth I think that is more maybe directly related is that, and I mention this because I've received this question and this point before, is that Palestinians are a nationality. They are Arab by ethnicity. So why don't these Palestinian Arabs go to any of these other Arab places in the Middle East region, Middle East and North Africa region? that they're somehow interchangeable with other Arabs. But I think it's important to point out that Palestinians have a distinct nationalism. They're tied to their particular land. A poll by the Arab Barometer that was actually completed on October 6th, so very timely, showed that the vast majority of Palestinians in Gaza, for example, 69%, say that they've never considered leaving their homeland. And 70% of those in Gaza are already refugees, expelled from their villages from when Israel was declared a state in 1948. So I just want to emphasize that I know that sometimes there's an interchangeability in how we discuss Palestinian identity, but Palestinians do have a distinct national identity that is tied to this particular place. Another myth is that there are no civilians in Gaza, or that because they voted for Hamas, that they're, subject to the consequences of Hamas existing. But it's important to note that there haven't been elections in any part of the Palestinian territory since 2006. And even then, Hamas, and they were voted into through the parliamentary elections, so it wasn't a presidential election. They won a plurality, not a large majority, and it was largely a referendum vote against the status quo. I can get into that if people are interested in internal Palestinian politics. But again, no elections have been conducted since 2006. Again, the Arab Barometer and the latest polling shows that Hamas is not that popular. For example, the amount of trust that Palestinians in Gaza had in the Hamas Authority, 44% said that they had no trust at all, or not a lot of trust, versus only 29% who expressed a great deal of trust. And then 72% said there was a large or medium amount of corruption in government. And there have been a number of social movements and mobilizations, whether it was the Great March of Return or whether a few months ago there were protests against living conditions in Gaza, that have attempted to bypass Hamas to some degree, to try to create kind of a social mobilization that speaks to what Palestinians in Gaza are going through, but that it doesn't engage with Hamas as a framework necessarily. And I think it's also important to note that half of Gazans are children. Like half of the Gaza population, Palestinians in Gaza, are children who grew up in a total blockade. So they haven't had a chance to vote for anybody. And finally, alternatives to Hamas, as well as other political actors across the Palestinian territories, have been systematically targeted or sidelined or destroyed. So the alternatives that could have existed, the people in the Palestinian political sphere who talk maybe about a sort of shared future between Palestinians or Israelis, or any kind of resolution that respects human rights and dignity, they really have largely been pushed out. I don't think it's controversial to say, given that this has been corroborated by Israeli sources, that the Israeli state has had an interest, in fact, I think, in upholding the bifurcation of the Palestinian territories. So one part of the Palestinian territories, the West Bank, governed by the Palestinian Authority, and the other part governed by Hamas Authority. They had some interest in maintaining that separation and that bifurcation as a sort of counterweight to other Palestinian political actors, in part so that they didn't have to talk about a way out of the conflict, whether that envisioned a shared future or not, so that they could put the process of peace talks on hold, and that they can create a condition where we can think of the conflict as more and more existential, where it doesn't have to be. So again, I can get into the specifics with Q&A, but I think maybe why I was invited, the topic of this forum is to discuss why what's happening in Palestine and what's happening in Gaza Strip in particular is relevant to people, whether it's Ukrainians or anyone else who are either in active conflict or are concerned about global security. I think it's my opinion that what we're seeing is really the final nail in the coffin for international law, international order, human rights, as imperfect as those frameworks have been in design and implementation. What we're seeing is a global system where might is right. And I think, especially for Ukrainians, this should be clear why this is important. But just to kind of spell it out, like there's a clear argument to be made that what emboldened and empowered the Russian state that culminated in the invasion of Ukraine really got its start in Syria in 2015. And no one paid attention, and nobody cared that Russia was crushing an uprising or creating a foreign outpost or testing weapons on Syrians. Europe was mostly concerned about the refugee flows. That was their largest concern. But that Russian adventure in Syria led to the further empowerment that we're seeing culminating in 22 in the creation in the invasion of Ukraine. So there is a direct link here between Syria in 2015 and Ukraine in 2022. And I think people are hopefully understanding more, even in mainstream, that allowing a state to behave as Russia did in its invasion of Ukraine and Syria shouldn't be allowed to pass. It's a recipe for death and destruction and increased global insecurity. But the problem is that the Western world, quote unquote, so the global North, the United States among them, has not offered an alternative, because it's allowed states in alliance with itself to engage in human rights violations, engage in war crimes, and it doesn't hold those states accountable either. And so that selectivity, I believe, is what is causing the lack of solidarity we're seeing between Ukrainians and Palestinians or any other group. And that's why, for example, when Russia invades Ukraine, the Palestinian Center for Survey and Policy Research had a poll in June 2022 where they asked Palestinians a number of different things over and over, but a current event that they were asking about was Russia's invasion. 42% of Palestinians blamed Russia for the war, but that's not a high enough number, obviously. And there is a lot of this, campism in the way that people view the world, and people have absorbed and bought into some of the propaganda around NATO and things like that. But again, I'll leave a lot for the discussion. But if we think about the world system that would be safest for people who aren't a part of any metropole, for even those communities in the trickiest kind of positions, we should think about the impact that something like the attack on Gaza or something like the invasion of Ukraine has on the global system. In the chat prior to this, I know that some people were talking about Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh. And I think that this is yet another moment where it's clear that states are learning, they understand that they could get away with forced displacement, they could get away with ethnic cleansing, they could get away with starvation as a tactic of war, and any kind of safeguards around that have completely fallen away. And so I think, that's how we should think about solidarity, about who to show solidarity to, and about rethinking solidarity. So it's solidarity with people, because if we think that we are insulated. So I'm a Palestinian. I'm not from Gaza. I'm from Jerusalem, but I live in the United States. But even if I wasn't a Palestinian, even if I don't have this personal connection, if we think that we're insulated, we're clearly not. What happens in these places that are deemed unimportant has global ramifications that impacts everyone's security. So yeah, I'd like to, I think, end on that point. And I know that I maybe spoke a little vaguely, but I'm happy to have that discussion after in the Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Dana. Vladislav, where are you?
I'm here. So,
okay. Would you like a time check, or do you just want to go ahead and talk for 15 or 20 minutes? That's fine.
Yeah, just stop me at 15 minutes. I don't think I have too much to say for 15 minutes, but yeah, I think there are a lot of talk about in Ukraine about the situation in Palestine, their positions, so on, and internationally about positions of Ukrainians in that, and a lot of insanity goes in mass media and discussion and positions of some Ukrainian official spokesmen. And all of that firstly shows the lack of dialogue, the lack of understanding of both struggles in Ukraine and in Palestine, and the need to build bridges between the people who are both suffering from occupation, from ethnic cleansing, from rocket strikes, civilian targeting, and so on. So I think it's really great that we have this event, and I'm sorry for Dana because she is now every week having the same event about Ukraine and Palestine, but I think it's really important and necessary work that we are doing here. And I think that what is going on right now is strongly connected with Artsakh, with Ukraine, with Palestine, with Syria, with Georgia, Chechnya before. That all of these conflicts, they widen the limits of the states, the limits of world order, shown step by step that the more violence is possible. And now that violence is normalized and the discussion of ethnic cleansings absolutely okay in the media, absolutely acceptable. And that's the problem that we are facing right now. Problem that ethnic cleansing, resettlements are now something that is just another point on the media that we are looking at, and everyone accepts this as a reality. So I want to start with some context about Ukrainians, Ukraine, what we are thinking about Palestine, what opinions, what identity issues there. Firstly, I think a lot of people have misconception about Ukraine as super pro-Israel state, while Zelensky position usually is shown as complete and full support for Israel for all of its actions, and unfortunately with very bad diplomatic takes. Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs consistently accepts Palestine as an independent state and organize its position from 1992 according to discussion between independent states, Ukraine and Palestine. Fully accepting that Palestine should be completely independent state with its policies, accepts Palestinian Authority as official government of Palestine, and accepts the need of compromise between Israel and Palestine. It never was completely pro-Israel position. It never was position against Palestine. And even now, Ministry of Foreign Affairs says that they are committed to independence of Palestine and peaceful solution of the conflict that is going on right now. So even in this situation, even when Ukrainian government and some Ukrainians show lack of solidarity for Palestinians, we still have a consistent diplomatic line of acceptance and recognition of independence of Palestinian state. And actually, the same goes from Palestinian Authority, which I know Dana can criticize a lot for its authoritarian character and so on and so on. But diplomatic exchange between Ukraine and Palestine is actually more consistent, and Palestinian Authority is more consistent and is more mutual than between Ukraine and Israel in terms of conflicts, in terms of war with Russia. And for example, Palestinian Authority accepts full territorial integrity of Ukraine, and Ukraine at the same time have very long history of relations, including trade relations, political, cultural relations with Palestine. For history of independent Ukraine, we have a strong identity and connection with Palestinian people who came here usually at universities to study and became part of Ukrainian communities. A lot of people have people who they know from Palestine, people who came here for a few years to study, who stayed here, who have relatives there. So a lot of Ukrainians still have these connections and dialogue, and some common identity with Palestinians because of it. The same goes for Israel. For now, there are 3,000 people who are in Palestine, and 3,000 Ukrainians who are in Palestine, and 15,000 who are now living in Israel. So immediately makes the conflict and everything that goes on in this territory incredibly personal for Ukrainians, because we have people, we have our connections, friends everywhere from the region. And in what happened from the 7th October, 19 Ukrainians already died in the situation, and a lot more are in danger. And people who are now in Gaza, Ukrainians in Gaza, at least by minimum calculation, 350 people tried to apply to Ukrainian embassy for evacuation. There are a lot more people there, but it's Ukrainian people. But 350 applied for evacuation and now are in this state where they're also part of blockade and staying without any possibility for peaceful evacuation and ceasefire and so on and so on. So Ukrainians suffering from the same problems right now in Gaza with a lot of Palestinians. Yeah, and with all of this, Ukrainian position in Ukrainian media, people who speak are usually absolutely pro-Israel. Ukraine doesn't have enough information, doesn't have enough dialogue with Palestinians people to understand the context. Usually the position takes form of some identity conflict in the struggle between civilized Western Israel and Palestine that is associated with the East, with culturally so-called, with Soviet Union, with Russia, which immediately creates this absolutely wrong and binary view of the world as Western good side and Eastern bad side, which of course Palestine usually in this narrative connected to the East, to the Russia. Immediately, whole nation is painted as some kind of Russian puppet that is on genetical level is anti-Ukrainian and so on and so on. So this view is very prevalent and it's very connected with identity and connected with Ukrainian aspiration to become this normal Western country and aspiration to join European Union, European community, and so on and so on. It creates very emotional discussions about the world, and usually it simplifies most of the dialogues that exist about this issue. It is immediately jumped that Palestinians are the same as Russia, and so on and so on. Usually, this discussion doesn't have any moral grounds, doesn't have any factual evidence, but it's very prevalent because of the issues connected to Ukrainian worldview right now. Unfortunately, there is not enough information, not enough people who are speaking about these issues in Ukrainian mass medias, and in general, public position is going around the same civilizational discourse. But in fact, I think we as Ukrainians have responsibility to connect the struggles and to try to show solidarity as much as possible as we can, because the struggle of Palestinians connects to us both because of personal connections to Palestine, but at the same time because of importance of human rights-based approach to international world order. If we accept that it is okay what's going on in Palestine right now, it means that we will accept that any country could do the same. We can accept that politics can be done by phosphor bombs and resettlements. And that's something that could harm not only Ukraine, not only Palestine, but whole world, any country. And that's one of the main reasons that our show of solidarity should not be limited to Ukraine and shouldn't be limited only to Palestine, but to all the struggles that are right now. So I would say that we have a serious problems in terms of understanding and dialogue right now. And as you probably heard about Zelensky trying to propose a meeting with Netanyahu, this practically a pro-fascist government in Israel after 7th October, we have a serious now problems in our general approach in discourse to Palestine. And unfortunately, I don't think that there would be immediate change to it. We still have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that continues the line, pretty much pro-Palestinian line, but the discourse itself is very pro-Israel, and pro-Israel in absolutely toxic sense because of this identity, Western identity thing, and this image of Israel as Western civilized country, which is absolutely doesn't hold, especially when now it commits absolutely horrible, inhumane, anti-democratic actions. But at the same time, there are changes, and it seems that some of them comes from the shared experience. It is a lot easier to speak with the people who are both being in situation under rocket strikes and seeing the photos from Mariupol and seeing the photos from Gaza, that they are nearly identical. That creates a lot of possibility to understand people and creates bridges that are unfortunately not developed because of the lack of such discussions as we have right now. Usually these discussions are very small, and majority discourse is dominated only by one position. I would say that Ukrainians in some way even lack just basic knowledge about the conflict to make a decision, to make a conscious decision about solidarity. And usual situation just isn't discussed in such way. So I would say that there are a lot of historical grounds for Ukrainian automatic pro-Israel position. It amounts to collective identity with Israel, with Jewish population. Ukrainians played a crucial part in founding Jewish state. For example, Golda Meir was living 2 streets from me. So Prime Minister of Israel in 70s. She was from Kiev, and a lot of people who were on which Israel state was built, they were from Ukraine, from Kiev, from Odessa. So we have a lot of historical connection. We have the trauma of Holocaust, and we have strong Ukrainian Jewish identity, which is something that we are really proud of. And sometimes it automatically creates the discourses that are doesn't go into detail of what's going on, but assumes this identity as something that means that we should always support Israel in all of its actions because we are interconnected in such way. And this discourse, unfortunately, isn't challenged. And this identity, these connections plays sometimes a negative role of just pushing the discussion in aside from human rights discussion, but in the side of discussion of similarities between Israel and Ukraine in terms of these historical connections, and not from the actions that is going on. Yeah, and all of this creates some kind of toxic discourse that is right now exists. And I hope to challenge this. I hope that a lot more Ukrainians will try to look at what's going on and try to build new solidarity that is extremely necessary right now against all the authoritarian states, against all imperialisms, against all occupation, against all illegal actions and war crimes that are going on, to build a better world where there are such actions like resettlements or mass killings because of nationality or colonization wouldn't be possible. And I think for this we should break this vision that a lot of Ukrainians have about Western, Eastern world, and try to build solidarity that goes far from positions of states, far from positions of this stupid binary campus system, and try to speak with real people and find similarities with our struggle. Because right now, both Palestinian people and Ukrainian people are struggling with occupation, with their land being stolen, and with these horrible conflicts going on our territories. At the same time, of course, it is important to not giving any space for campus discussions, not giving any space for people who are pushing anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, it seems that anti-Semitism on the left is absolutely on the highest point that it has ever been, especially with organizations who are consistently anti-Ukrainian. They're also committed to position of hate and of hate by nationality. And it is something that we should aspire to isolate and at the same time provide an alternative that wouldn't go into Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, campism, but build bridges and international solidarity based on human rights approach and our own experiences. So sorry for it's being not very informative and very chaotic. Unfortunately, I have just a lot of thoughts that I cannot formulate good. So I probably will answer questions and say something interesting in the question part. So thank you a lot.
You'll have a chance to come in, as will Dana, and offer at the end to wrap things up. I see there's a couple of hands raised. We do have one more speaker who's going to speak just briefly for 5 minutes. Ofer Neiman, who is in Israel, who's an anti-apartheid Israeli activist, and then we will open up the discussion. Go ahead, Ofer, welcome.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to switch off my video because my connection is not very stable. So just a moment. And so I'll say a few things, then I'll probably post a few links in the chat box. And if anyone has questions, you can ask, or I mean, you can also find me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, under my name. So I'll go ahead. So obviously, of course, the first thing coming from me as a Jewish Israeli right now, I mean, I live in Jerusalem, is full solidarity with the Palestinian people. There is a small minority of Israeli dissidents here who are anti-Zionist, anti-apartheid, support the BDS movement. And I'm mostly active with a group called Boycott from Within, which is a group of Israeli citizens who support the Palestinian BDS campaign, actively support in various ways. So I would like to start with a short statement from a great Israeli activist called Orly Noy. Orly Noy, she's a Jewish Israeli activist born in Tehran of Iranian descent. And this expresses my own sentiment right now, and she addresses other Israelis. I stopped believing you. I look at you obsessively uploading pictures of Israeli children who were murdered, kidnapped, left orphaned after the massacre in the south, while you absolutely demand the murder of children in Gaza. I no longer believe a word of yours. Anyone who doesn't understand how terrible is what we're doing right now in Gaza, how much end of the world it is from a moral perspective, in a darkened, silenced, isolated Gaza, doesn't really believe in the sanctity of life. They believe in the sanctity of Jewish blood instead. She goes on, even before we could comprehend the magnitude of our disaster, mourn it, lament it, you encouraged the shedding of rivers of blood in Gaza, thereby forever defiling the memory of the victims of the massacre in the south with the shameful stain of the lost lives of thousands of other innocent people. You have erased their memory in the rivers of blood that are now being spilled in Gaza. You also sacrificed the Israeli abductees to this bloodlust that has blindfolded you and erased every moral red line. You don't mourn for anyone. You don't understand the value of any child's life. I don't believe a single word of yours anymore. So I think this is a powerful statement. She's a great writer. She often writes for 972 magazine. That's in English. You can find her there on Facebook too. So beyond this powerful statement, maybe just some information on what's going on right now inside Israel. What Israelis know and what are Israelis doing. So The Israeli media doesn't show the devastation in Gaza, except for maybe a few aerial images, rather sterile, of the destruction from a bird's view in recent days. They don't show real human suffering. There's a very small minority of people who are trying to protest against the war, but actually demonstrations are banned. And the only ones who can sort of get away with it are more privileged Jewish Israelis in Tel Aviv. We have two groups there. One is the families of the captives, and their message is, of course, bring them back home. They're not saying bomb Gaza or don't bomb Gaza, but there's also a second group of Israelis like me who are calling, for example, chanting ceasefire now, a rather small demonstration, but they want to stop the carnage. And beyond that, people may express their views on Facebook, but not much beyond that. There's a lot of persecution towards Palestinian citizens of Israel, people getting fired, people getting arrested just for even liking a tweet or a Facebook posting. It's interesting, and I can put the links up in the chat box later, that quite a few bereaved families from the massacre in the south, the attack in the south, have actually spoken out against bombing Gaza. You have some liberals and some people there who are not bloodthirsty, but Israeli society doesn't really listen to what they have to say. And I know these are not necessarily families of hostages. These are families of people who are already dead. So they're just against killing people in Gaza. It's not about just trying to rescue a loved one from Gaza. Israeli human rights groups, mostly here and there, you hear some statements against the violence in Gaza, but some groups are actually silent. B'Tselem, the most prominent group, is a bit more vocal. Pro-Palestinian protests across the world are framed as unhinged or anti-Semitic. And I would say that overall, what we're seeing here is that most liberal Israelis who supported the Palestinian cause to some extent out of compassion, that's not enough right now. There's a sort of a collapse there. Only those who have a more solid, some understanding at least of settler colonialism, I think these groups are more consistent. So except for boycott from within, I can mention two additional groups. One of them is Israelis Against Apartheid. We have a group now circulating a petition against the attack on Gaza. And by now we have almost 1,600 signatures of Israeli citizens. It's up on the Jewish Voice for Peace website. And okay, and John also asked me to say something about Ukraine and the Israeli left. So people like us, the so-called radicals, the anti-apartheid here, one thing that's positive, perhaps about us in comparison to American leftists or democratic socialists of America, people who support Palestine but are anti-Ukraine, most of us are pro-Ukraine. Okay, we hardly have anyone here who is anti-Ukraine. We do have a problem with the Israeli Communist Party. The Israeli Communist Party is the core element of Hadash. Hadash is the parliamentary bloc headed by Ayman Ude. You've probably heard that name, MK Ayman Ude. They have quite a few Assadists and Putinists, and they're also not that good on Palestine. They are stuck on the two-state slogans, very childish two-state slogans. And we're not really active in the same scene. We are more around BDS and settler colonialism. And we are trying to build international solidarity. We don't believe that we can build, at least for now, a strong Israeli opposition to apartheid from within. We are looking to sort of contribute to the global struggle. So I don't know if I have time left. I can say some other things maybe about the current Israeli politics, the polls. Do I still have a minute or two left? Or
I think if you could hold on to that information until the end of the meeting, that would be better, because we want to make sure people have a chance to ask their questions and to make comments. So thank you very much, Ofer. So I see that Frida and Iona have their hands raised. I'm going to call on you, but after that, we're going to prioritize the voices from Swana and Ukraine. And again, we unfortunately, because the number of people, we do have to limit comments to 2 minutes, and John will be timing. So, and of course, you can come back in again, and we hope that that will be possible because we know there's a lot to say. Go ahead, Frida.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful program. And first, I wanted to say that my heart goes out to my Ukrainian colleagues and my Palestinian colleagues. Dana, pleasure to meet you, Dana. I know Vladislav from the past. I agree that we've entered a new stage of normalization of ethnic cleansing. It has to do with the global stage of authoritarianism that we've been discussing, and we need to discuss more about why this is happening. Question I have is this: one country that has been hurting both the Palestinian struggle and the Ukrainian struggle, among others, but one country in particular is Iran, where I'm from. So in the case of Iran and Ukraine, we've seen efforts by Ukrainian activists to express their solidarity with the Women Life Freedom Movement, and a few efforts by Iranians to express solidarity with the Ukrainians. In the case of Palestinians, we've seen there's actually quite a bit of sympathy with Palestine, the Palestinian struggle inside Iran, even though the Iranian government has instrumentalized the Palestinian struggle for its own purposes. And what Ofer just reported about Orly Noy is wonderful. Orly Noy is Iranian Israeli. And the fact that she made that statement is tremendous. Ofer, would you kindly send me the link to the statement? And could you give me her email address? I would love to write to her. But
Sure.
My question is, why is it that on the part of Palestinians, we've seen so little in solidarity with the Women Life Freedom Movement? I only saw one statement last year. It was quoted on the website Zamaneh without any reference, so I never saw the source of it. But it was a statement from a group of Palestinian artists. Other than that, hardly anything. So without solidarity between the anti-authoritarian feminist labor struggles inside Iran and those that are progressive and anti-Hamas and anti-Hezbollah among Palestinians, we can't get anywhere, given the incredibly destructive role of the Iranian government. So I would love to hear from Dana about that. Thank you so much.
Can I answer directly? You're Cheryl, you're muted.
Go ahead. Yes.
I didn't know if you wanted to get a bunch of questions.
That's easiest. Go ahead. Yes.
I think that your question, Frida, relates to some of the questions that are in the chat about Palestinian support for Syrian revolution, and what else was the other question here? Solidarity for Ukraine amongst Palestinians in the diaspora. Well, yes. One, I don't think that solidarity is transactional. So thank you to the person in the chat who's writing that. But I do want to point out a couple of issues here. There are a number of Palestinians in their personal capacity who have been very vocal about what's happening in Iran, and what's happening in Syria and things like this. So I know that that's the case. I know that especially in the Syrian context, there were Palestinian organizations who put out statements who were against the Assad regime, particularly since the Assad regime raised the Yarmouk, the Palestinian camp, to the ground. There are people who are attempting these kinds of solidarities. But there's a couple of reasons why maybe we're not seeing it as widespread as we would like. One is that in the Palestinian territories, in occupied Palestine, there are, as I mentioned earlier, the space for alternatives to this binary are actively targeted and actively sidelined. And I would say, like, there's not a lot of, I mean, there are some formal organizations, but people are so brutalized and so just trying to survive in the day to day, that this is not a point that they address directly because they feel like there's more proximate concerns that they have to deal with. I'm not saying that necessarily I agree with that, but what I'm saying is that we have to think about people's positionalities. So this kind of question about like where's the solidarity for Iran or where's the solidarity for Syria, I think that that is a more relevant question for Palestinians or pro-Palestine activism in the diaspora, because they do have the privilege, like they're not under direct threat and they're not dealing with those pressures. And I think that where we've seen failures in solidarity, both from Palestinians to others and others to Palestinians as well. Like, so for example, you mentioned that in Iran there is a great deal of support for Palestinians, but I remember hearing Iranian activists talking about how they use a Palestine check to figure out whether people are pro women women's movement or anti-women's movement. So Palestine became kind of a mark of being pro-regime, as you said, because the regime has instrumentalized the Palestinian cause. But my point is, when we're seeing a lack of solidarity in places where there isn't as much threat, I think then we have to think about what are the conditions that have created that lack of solidarity. Is it that organizations that talk about an alternative are being targeted? Is it that tankies and campists have infiltrated organizations in a way that people haven't been paying attention to or thought that they could ignore? Is it that people are absorbing disinformation also about these issues? So that's also a problem. I think that for the average person in the Palestinian diaspora, there are people who are campists. That's true. And then there are some who just don't understand the complexity of this. And when they see the United States giving a green light to anything that happens in the Palestinian territories, it's very easy to think, well, okay, I'm anti this, so I must be pro that. So I'm sorry if it's not a very pithy answer to why there isn't solidarity, but I think that there are a lot of structural constraints against Palestinians in the territories. And then outside the territories, the Palestinians are just like any other group. I think it's not a failure of the Palestinians in particular, it's a failure of the left. And so when we want to resolve that, we think about, okay, so is it a lack of information? Is it, what are the root causes of this failure on the left of
Dana, can I
solidarity? Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more to be said about that. Thank you very much for your comments, but we've got a lot of other hands raised here. So
sorry, yes.
No, that's okay. No need to apologize. So I'm going to call on Iona and then Simon, but then I'm going to call on Marussia. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And I also want to ask Joey Ayub and also Rama if they would like to come in. And then after that, I'll circle back to Linda. So go ahead, Iona.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, my question it's for Vladislav, and it's specifically, I'm wondering about the role of the Ukrainian Jewish community right now, because, for instance, speaking to my experience in the United States, like being involved in Palestine solidarity organizing there, like right now, what I've been seeing in the United States is a lot of serious activism coming from a group that is a name familiar to any of us in the Palestine solidarity movement in the United States, Jewish Voice for Peace, an organization that presents this Jewish voice for solidarity with Palestine to challenge the narrative that, like, if you're a Jew, you support Israel. If you're a Jew, you're a Zionist. And I've been really impressed by some of their actions recently in the United States. Like they did a sit-in in the Capitol. Like many of them got arrested in the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C. Also in Grand Central Station, I saw they had a mass civil disobedience. So really sending this message that if you're Jewish, it doesn't mean you support the actions of the state of Israel. Now in Ukraine, it's of course different. Like, I mean, the U.S. has the second largest Jewish community in the world, and Ukraine, of course, used to have a very big one. Now it's much smaller than it used to be. But I'm just wondering if there are any like critical Jewish voices in Ukraine for Palestine in the same way that we have in the US. Like from what I know, historically in the Ukrainian Jewish community, there was a lot of conflation between Palestine solidarity and anti-Semitism in Soviet times, because the Soviet Union supported the Palestinian struggle for geopolitical reasons, for campism, and it also had practiced anti-Semitic policies towards its Jewish population. So there's that. And yeah, I'm just guessing that maybe people like might not know many Jews, and maybe the one Jew that they'll know in Ukraine, like they assume that they're pro-Israel. So I'm just wondering, is there any like critical voice that you're familiar with for in solidarity with Palestine from the Ukrainian Jewish community today?
Gonna hold that question till later. Maybe other people can address it when they speak. Simon and then Marussia.
Yes, thank you. My questions are, first of all, for Ofer Neiman. I saw this brutal threat by Israeli authorities on people who oppose the current slaughter in Gaza, where he said that opposers would be sent to Gaza. I wanted to know if this threat was addressed only at Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, or if it was also meant to be directed at Israeli leftists and pacifists in general. Also, I would like to know his position when he rejects, as I do also, the two-state solution, if he is for one democratic, non-racist and secular state in all of historical Palestine. And my questions for Vladislav are if Commons has any position on the colonial oppression of Palestine, and in a personal level, does he agree that Israel is an apartheid state and that the essence of the conflict is the imperialist and colonialist enclave, racist apartheid regime imposed on the Palestinian people? If he agrees with this characterization. Thank you.
Okay. Marussia, are you there? Marussia?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Got COVID, so I'm keeping my camera off because it's not pretty. Thank you so much for this debate. It seems to me something I've been thinking about for a while is that we have a double task: to educate the left and to educate the left about Ukraine and to educate Ukrainians about Palestine. And I've noticed that there are notably few Ukrainian names on this call, even though I did try to spread the word. As a longtime socialist feminist who writes and makes films about Ukraine, I have certainly felt not only abandoned, but also frequently called out for speaking and making films that are about Ukraine and that address the war. So I've decided that I now have to organize in the Palestinian movement and somehow bring my people with me. To any of you, the speakers, what are your, or organizers, what are your thoughts about how to build solidarity for you? And this is a big question, how to build solidarity for Ukraine in the left and or solidarity for Palestine among Ukrainians. And I'm also wondering, Vladislav, have there been any pro-Palestinian protests in Ukraine?
Okay, I'm going to call on Rama Kudaimi, and then I'll circle back to the other people who'd like to speak. Go ahead, Rama.
Thanks, Cheryl. So just appreciate the space that folks are coming into. A lot of great questions. I'll just add, I think in this moment, we are in very dangerous times. Genocide is happening as we're all watching. And I think this is just something to think about also as we're having these conversations about the left and the problems of the left, I think we need to be very clear that holding these multiple things at once, of just like having these conversations, how we push on the left, but also the action is needed immediately, urgently. Most of us here are folks in the US, I assume, which means every single one of us is sadly complicit in what's happening because our leadership continues to be terrible on this. So wanted to just throw that out there. I know folks still have questions about context of things, which are important, but there is also, you know, as we turn into thinking later in the call of like, what are the actions? I think, you know, holding that is very important. So just dropping kind of a bunch of actions that are happening this week. I am more than happy to get on a call with anybody who's like, I want to organize, I'm not sure what to do. So offering that as a resource. Many folks on this call can do that as well. So just kind of urging us, like, as we're doing the important political education and thinking through the problems that we all encounter as the left. For folks who don't know me, I'm a Syrian activist. So I understand the pain people are bringing of like feeling the abandonment and the lack of solidarity and all of that. And still, I think we are in a moment where we urgently need action as much as kind of just talking through these issues together. Thank you.
I agree with Rama 100% on that. And I want to circle back to Dana and Vladislav and also offer to answer the questions that were asked in the interim, but particularly by Marusha. Do you have any comments on that? Yeah,
excuse me, I feel that they were more directed to Vladislav.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start. There are 3 questions. First, about Jewish community in Ukraine. I would say that question of Palestine is not the biggest question of a Jewish community right now. The biggest question is usually rockets flying over their heads. So there are not much in general organized political discussions around any topic except the war in Ukraine that is going on. And especially it is relevant from the Jewish community. There are not much big political activity coming from this community right now, because the first question that Ukrainians are facing now is winning the war, and all of the political organizations are centered around this thing. And it's also coming to question about pro-Palestine protests. Right now, 90% of the protests in Ukraine is about actually limiting public spending to send more money to the front line. Nearly no one protests other things. So the main priorities right now is usually on the front line. And because of this, of course, it is more harder, well, because of safety reasons and because of all the attention to the war, to protest on other topics and to gather rallies on other topics. So Ukraine is very centered on the priority of winning the war. About position of Commons, I sent the article in the chat. I am not an editor in the Commons, I'm just a contributor, and they're writing constantly about Palestine, not only this year, not only from the full-scale invasion, but constantly, and they have consistent pro-Palestinian position. I don't think that they have any certain position about 2-state, 1-state, and so on and so on. And I don't think that such long-term positions is really necessary for building solidarity, because right now is the question about resettlements, war crimes, mass killings of civilians that are relevant, that are need solidarity. And practically both 1-state and 2-state solutions, if we want to address what's going on right now with attacks in Gaza, wouldn't be possible, and there would be a solution of one greater Israel or something like this. So I don't think that it is particularly a priority to have a certain position about this. And the most important is just to show solidarity with the people, try to amplify their voices, and speak about the atrocities and the need of human rights-based world order. And how to build solidarity with Palestinian and Ukrainians. I see that Ukrainians have a very specific language that is connected with the war that is going on against Russia, with the narratives that are existing right now. And to speak with Ukrainians should understand how Ukrainians are now thinking and what Ukrainians are worried about and how their identity is intertwined between the conflicts of Israel, Palestine, West, East, and so on and so on. So what I see is that there are a lot of possibilities actually to build Ukrainian-Palestinian solidarity if to find words to speak about these issues and not to try to push certain language towards the people. From all my discussion from friends that I have, apolitical, left, right, and so on and so on, I saw that none of them was really hostile to the Palestinians or Palestinian state, but it is very important to answer this paranoia about them being pro-Russian and to try to build such narratives that won't speak about this in terms of camps and won't try to push discussion in the language that is foreign to Ukraine. I usually spoke about Netanyahu, about his pro-Russian ties, about how similar what's going on in Gaza and Palestine and Mariupol, for example, and all of that. It is there's a lot of possibility to create connections and for people to understand, but one should think about the person who he speaks about in his context or her or theirs, or the solidarity would be immediately stopped by the wall of prejudices and traumas because of the conflict, because of these narratives and so on and so on. But if one person is patient and thinks about all this context and all the fears that people have, and it goes both ways about speaking with Palestinians who have more campus position and so on, then there are a lot of possibility to building the solidarity. Everyone is practically understands what's going on and is open to speak if you won't lose the person in few first seconds. And of course, it is also very important not to demand perfect positions from people who are suffering from occupation and from people who are suffering from not suffering, but objected to all of these established narratives about West, East, about popular opinions, and so on and so on. Usually, the people are not introduced in this discussions very well to have a very thought out opinion. And the second, when you are, for example, mother with 2 children in bomb shelter, you cannot have a good opinion on the world conflicts. It's not what you're thinking about. It goes for Palestinians and it goes from Ukrainians. For example, I never demand people who are suffering from occupation to have these perfect opinions, and it's not needed. It's something that we could discuss and so on, but it's not the thing that is needed for showing solidarity to each other. Because usually it's really hard to think about these issues in such contexts when you're in cities which are occupied, which are under rocket strikes and so on. It's really better to not demand too much from the people. And it's very different from the discussions that is going on in the West and in the actual countries where the wars are going on. So thank you. I think that's it with questions.
So I want to try to refocus the discussion on what's at hand, which is the critical task of actually, well, I think building what I will call a working group. That was one of the goals that we had out of this meeting, was to actually build a working group of people who want to actually do this work of building solidarity between Palestine and Ukraine, those movements. So if I could just ask everyone who speaks from this point on to try to focus on that, because otherwise we're just talking and we can't just talk, as everybody here understands. So I want first off, is there anyone who would like to speak from Swana or Ukraine that is not able to use the raise hand function? Okay, just speak up or send me a message in the chat. I'm going to circle back to Linda and Sam and Ted after I call on Lai. Help me with your name. Lai.
Layali.
Layali, thank you. You go ahead.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes. So thank you for having this meeting. And first, I want to say, thank you for. I'm Palestinian from the West Bank. I was invited by my friend Ola to attend this discussion. And first, I want to thank Ofer for the words that he spoke. I think it's really enlightening to understand what's going on in Israel at the moment, because also, of course, we don't get a lot of information about what's happening there. And of course, I hope that all of the hostages return safely. And what happened on the 7th of October was also tragic, because of all the civilians and the families that got hurt. I just want to say that I hope when we talk about solidarity between Ukraine and Palestine is that we stop, even using the word Hamas. I think it's important to use the word Palestinian resistance and to recognize that anyone who is under occupation and even under international law, that they have the right to resist the occupation. And unfortunately, sometimes, the anti-colonial struggle, it gets ugly, it gets violent. And so I just want to say that I think it's important that we shift our speech. So the same as Ukrainians have the right to fight Russia with all means necessary. This is also something that we just need to stay aware of. And instead of falling into those dichotomies of like, this is Hamas who is doing this, so this is why we shouldn't kill the people in Gaza because they are held hostage by Hamas. I think that we need to speak more generally about the Palestinian resistance.
Okay. Linda. You have to unmute yourself, Linda.
I wanted to address what Frida was saying, and also like Dana's answer is that the reason why there's so little solidarity between different groups, like Iranian women, Syrians, Kurds, and is the damn left, especially the Western left, which is they support a lot of regimes that not only that oppress women and oppress other ethnic groups like Uyghurs. And of course, the wholesale abandonment of Syrians was is like really the biggest black mark that that has really caused a lot of what's happened since then. We're isolated because we're the only socialist group in the United States that supports Ukraine pretty much. There's a few others like Freedom Socialist Party and I think Workers' Voices in the United States, although it might not be, but it's just we have a left that is picking sides and amongst different occupiers and colonizers, and like they have great positions on women's rights and other stuff, but they support regimes that are against women's rights and gay rights. So this group has really done a lot, I think, to try and find people, that are struggling without solidarity, like the Uyghurs and the Butiar. All right, there's several nationalities in the Russian Federation that are really oppressed, especially by this war. And we've been in contact with some of them, and people from Hong Kong, Taiwan. It's just endless. Not all these people have a whole lot in common, but a lot of them are fighting for their lives, and for their rights. That's all I was going to say.
Okay, Sam, Ted, and then myself.
Yeah, and I actually see what I'm saying as speaking to the question of what a working group faces. but I want to back off a second and talk about the general situation of what's shaping the views of a lot of groups within some of the countries we're talking about, Palestine, Ukraine, and whatnot. If you have a country that is giving arms to your struggle, it's very hard to be too vocal against them. And the ruling class among your people are likely to try to suppress you if you do it. So that this is a basic part of the material formation of ideology that we always have to be conscious of, along with the things like Vladislav was talking about the fact that when you're being physically attacked, every moment you're fearing for what's going to happen to some extent. You don't necessarily have time to read about every other countries that's a group of people that's being oppressed around the world. On the other hand, some of the greatest examples of international solidarity came out of people during the First World War who were precisely in the position of being in the front lines and in fear of their lives. And the obvious distinction between now and then is that there was a serious international working class based socialist consciousness. And so part of the task, as I see it, of any group that is serious about supporting both Palestinians and Ukrainians and all the other groups that have been mentioned, is to build that basic conception of working class socialist solidarity. Now that requires a vision of socialism that is both from below, and for it to become mass, it has to be appealing. It also has to be non-sectarian. I mean, there are a lot of groups on the left that are for both the Palestinian and the Ukrainian and the Uyghur and a lot of other struggles.
Sam, I'm sorry, but you've been talking for 3 minutes. You can cut, yeah.
Okay, let me just finish it off. So
Okay,
as people think through as a working group how to frame it, it's critically important to keep those questions also in mind.
Okay, all right, great. Ted. And then I'm going to call on Rachel Atwood and then myself.
Okay, well, I want to thank the speakers, even though Dana has left, but thank you, Dana, and Ofer and Vladislav. There's a lot here, so I can't address all of it that I want to. First of all, I would like to correct something that Linda and Cheryl said. It's not true that the whole left did not support the Syrian revolution or the Arab uprising, the Arab Spring. Most of the left in the United States and in Europe, the descendants of Stalinism and a lot of other people who might be called social democrats and liberals didn't. But a lot of the left, an important minority, did. And that includes what at the time was called the International Socialist Organization in the United States. It's just important to recognize this because the legacy of those people who supported Syria has grown. Also, the Ukraine Solidarity Network in the United States is issuing a statement. It's not finished yet, but it's titled, "We stand with Ukraine, we stand with Palestine, end the genocide in Gaza." And Haymarket Books, the largest left publisher in the United States, is sponsoring an important event like this which Dana will also be a speaker at. I'm willing to be part of the working group, depending on when it gets together to meet. I think that there's an important political point, which is the only thing I'm going to say on these big issues, is it's almost impossible to imagine Ukraine winning and Palestine winning without the destruction of the current regimes in Russia and Israel. And we need to keep this in mind for everything we do in uniting these two struggles. That's all I have to say.
Okay, I'm going to call on Rachel and then Olga and then myself.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wow, thanks for taking my question. I guess it's for Vladislav, or really anyone can fill in on like connecting to the situation with Ukraine on the ground. It's actually what I wrote. Oh, I think in the. Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like he actually just sent me a. Did he send me a response? I'm sorry. I'm just babbling. About my question relates to potential of like solidarity efforts, particularly within the Crimean Tatar community in Ukraine and Palestinians as kind of as a joint historically ethnically cleansed and colonized communities that are majority Muslim as well. And I could say of the few people I've seen on regularly social media, I've had rather staunchly pro Israeli positions, which is a little depressing. I mean, it seems like, at least on the upper levels of politically and whatnot, Ukraine is really trying to stamp out Islamophobia, I would say, like primarily as a way to be more welcoming and inclusive of the Crimean Tatars, to, you know, offer them more autonomy and self-determination than Russia would. But I'm just wondering, is there a way that you know, that these communities with historical similarities have a place to finding a common ground and something to work from there on? So that's basically my rambling question. Thanks.
Okay. All right, you're allowed to ramble. Olga, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for organizing this really inspiring talks. It's great to know that you're not alone, like you're not crazy. You know, a lot of people have the same views on the situation. I am actually Layali's friend. I invited her today to join these conversations. I can say that I am myself just analyzing myself as Ukrainian and my level of propaganda that I had before, and before 2016, when I moved to United States as a part of like a Fulbright scholarship, where I met Layali. She was a scholar from West Bank and I was from Ukraine. Until that moment, I didn't know nothing about Palestine. Like, to my big kind of shame, I was absolutely just product of the culture of Ukrainian kind of narrative that we receive. And since the kind of comment that I wanted to make is that I think one of the most crucial aspects that we need to focus on thinking about Ukrainians and how to educate Ukrainians about this subject is making it clear the division that Zionism is a political ideology and Judaism is a religion, and Jewishness, like Jewish as identity, and that those three things are like all like different things. And to make this kind of clear, I think it will be like a key for Ukrainians who are maybe like most of them are related by blood to Ashkenazi Jews, to Judaism, and also what I think is really crucial is to understand that Israel uses like a psychological warfare. They use the trauma of Holocaust. So basically they're weaponizing it and using it to justify terrible crimes. And here I would say that we have, I feel like the Zionism generally uses Ukraine and the trauma of also Ukrainian Babi Yar and Ukrainian Holocaust as well to kind of play on that feelings and on that trauma, to kind of confuse Ukrainians also to just fully support like Israel state. And it's like, I think it's crucial, educate people on that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to call on myself, and then I'll call on John. So I went to a large protest in San Francisco yesterday that was called by about 12 different organizations to stop the genocide. And I had this sign with me. I guess you can't see it. Anyhow, it has a graphic system: Palestine to Ukraine, occupiers have no claim, oppose all imperialist United States, Israel, Russia, defend Palestine, defend Ukraine. I didn't see anybody else there with a sign like that. Maybe they were there, but it was hard for me to be at this protest, because while at the one hand, I was glad to see such an outpouring of support and calling for a ceasefire now, for an end to the genocide, there was no mention of Ukraine, even though one of the speakers that spoke gave a detailed description about what genocide in Palestine looks like, and they could have been talking about Ukraine with those examples. There was no mention of women, life, and freedom, and the execution of political prisoners in Iran. It was a single focus demonstration, which maybe that's what's needed, but I think that we have a problem. We have a problem in that the people who, the campus, the tankies, whatever you want to call them, they are in fact the leadership of this movement calling for a ceasefire and supporting Palestine. And there is no dialogue of the type that we're having here. It's a one-way conversation. And I don't know how to begin that conversation. That's part of the work that we have been doing in the last almost 2 years. So I think that, so some of the concrete things we've talked about that can be done would be house meetings with just your neighbors, your friends, other political people that you may know, because we have to break through the perspective of multipolarity, if you will, the lack of international solidarity. But on the other hand, we also have to educate people who have been influenced by the extreme Israeli pro-Israel propaganda in this country. So we have a very serious challenge. I can't say enough about how frustrating and disturbing it is that it's as if no other struggles exist, and there is not any intention, as far as I can tell, to unite the struggles that need to be supported and defended in terms of international solidarity in this movement in support of Palestine at this time. All right, John, and then, no, I'm going to call on Rama next. Rama and then John. Go ahead.
Sure, thanks. I have a kind of a direct response. So I want to, again, caution us to think about, yes, there are some tankies leading some of the calls to action in certain cities, but I really want to push back on the idea that like somehow are like, we're talking about groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, we're talking about groups like U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, we're talking about like Palestinian organizers all across the country taking action. And I think it's I want to, again, caution us, like, you might see the Answer folks out there, you might see the PSL signs out there, some of the rallies are going to be there, but that's not what's actually kind of pushing the moment in this time. So I do want to make sure that we are careful on that, because I think that can also demoralize sometimes. It was just like, this is not, the role. I know it's, it's frustrating when we're talking about the left and that we focus on the left because it's like, why is the left talking about this or this? But I think sometimes we also have to understand that part of the problem that's happened, and again, as to Dana's point around like these are structural issues. But I will tell you, for example, I have spent the last 2 weeks unfollowing many people who were allies of the Syrian revolution because they have come out as completely genocidal with genocidal rhetoric against the Palestinian people. I have had to unfollow people I followed on Ukraine because they have come out with completely pro-genocide rhetoric re-Palestine. So I think, again, I want us to like, it's easier for us to talk about the left because we are leftists. It's easier for us to engage. It's easier to feel portrayed. But this is a problem that I knew was gonna come someday and it was gonna be revealed that a lot of the people we were talking to on Syria, a lot of the people we were talking about on Ukraine, we knew that their politics on Palestine were shit. And in the moment, we felt, well, we had to build up certain things. And now it's all coming to the forefront. And I think what this moment then shows us is what is our role as the people who understand that occupation is a crime no matter where, that human rights need to be absorbed everywhere, that our role can be to have these conversations, to push, while at the same time not losing sight, again, I will stress that we have to do what we can to stop. It's for a ceasefire now, to end U.S. military funding for what Israel is doing. And there's gonna be hard conversations that are gonna have. You're gonna be sometimes in uncomfortable spaces. But I think if the Syrians and the Ukrainians and the Palestinians on this call and everyone else who's like of impacted communities are willing to be in those spaces and understand the complexities and the nuances, then it's important that we all kind of do that as well.
All right. Thank you, Rama. John, go ahead.
Okay, so this is just the start of this discussion, and I hope that we do come out of this forming some kind of working group. And I want to say that that the issue of uniting the struggles around Palestine and Ukraine is just the opening of the door. It's just the tip of the iceberg of a whole complex of issues that we have to face. And it will have to get into the degeneration of the socialist left in the United States and around the world. And, Cheryl mentioned the protest she was at yesterday. I've been to a lot of them like that. We hear a lot of fiery denunciations of the situation, whatever it might be, if it's the murder of George Floyd or in this case around Palestine. And that's not enough. You have to have also a serious discussion about, well, what is the nature of this problem, of this crisis that we're facing, and where do we go from here? And also, I know that this is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, but we've heard it over and over again, many times in other situations, but we cannot ignore the role of the Democratic Party in influencing and in drawing into itself and all its left factions, that they have through the NGOs, MoveOn.org, different environmental groups, and so on, drawing it into the Democratic Party. And that is part and parcel of a failure to really look at perspectives and a real program. The other point that I want to make is, that social media is enormously important, but the thing that really changes things is getting out into the streets. That is what made the movement around George Floyd so significant, millions of people out in the streets. And so we have to link these two things together. The building a movement out into the streets, but also clarity on where that movement goes. And in my opinion, and I don't think I'm alone in this, but anyway, in my opinion, the disastrous role of the Democratic Party and all its, quote, left faces.
Brad, go ahead. Brad? I guess you seem to be frozen. Maybe
am I breaking up?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Why don't you turn your camera off and then we can just hear you? That might be better.
Okay, sorry.
Just turn your camera off and then.
Go. Okay. Is that better?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to keep this.
Oh, Brad, your audio is absolutely terrible. Yeah, I can't hear you. I don't know what's going on.
If you can't hear me, I'll skip it.
Well, try again. Try again.
I'm not. Can you hear me?
Well, barely. It's really.
We can hear you when you ask, can you hear me if you're doing something different then?
I would just on.
Brad, maybe you can put your comments like in the chat so we can hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think he's going to have to do that. Okay. I don't see any other hands raised. I would like to ask if there is anybody else who would like to speak, especially, okay, Talmadge, and then Megan. Go ahead, Talmadge.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief. It seems like I want to thank the speakers for an excellent conversation. I think John's right. This is just the start of a longer conversation. I would tend to advocate, what I've seen is really a kind of a profound ignorance of the history of the Middle East, profound ignorance of the history of Ukraine, of Eastern Europe. Some of it intentional, some of it not, but I think that part of our job needs to be to help educate the public about the truth about the histories of these conflicts. And I think that what we're facing is not just understanding the histories, but understanding whose history. It's pretty clear that the Zionist movement in Israel have a particular take on the history of Israel that's quite different from the actual history experienced by Palestinians and Arabs in general. And it's no different in Ukraine, where Russian supporters would have a particular version of history compared to the Ukrainian history. So the question of truth is what comes out here, and ideology and power. And so I think part of our, and this is the comment, part of our task is to assist in the education of the masses, of the public, about what the actual truths are, whether it's talking about the Balfour Agreement, and that led to the rise of Israel, or rather it's talking about what actually happened in Ukraine prior to 2014 and the struggles going on there, even back to Lenin. So I just want to make the case that I think that part of what's needed here is groups set up to educate other groups about the histories and the sources that we use. And I would argue that we should steer clear as much as possible of sectarian sources and stick with verified historical material that attempts to offer a quote objective analysis as much as possible of these struggles at different angles.
Okay, Megan, and then I'm going to call on Clay, Walter, Rick, Brad, and then I'll circle back to Vladislav. Okay, Megan, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you to Vladislav and Dana and Offer for speaking today. It's been really inspiring and helpful. I just wanted to share with folks some thoughts that I've had as someone who's been like very focused on the disinformation coming out of Russia and sort of the, let's say, alliance of disinformation between Russia, China, Iran, and Assad. And how that relates to the way that we kind of frame our education campaigns. I think potentially these will ultimately operate on two levels, which is, ideally, and as I think we will get into, this group, Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign, is going to build more and more campaigns to educate and address the disinformation on the left. And then also what I have noticed is that it can be helpful, and I'm sure some of you are doing this, but if you are not doing this, now that there's this space, at least that I've seen in my circles, where we are able to kind of call each other in and be like, hey, heads up, did you know about this? That we can continue to take that perspective with people that we're close to and people that we do some organizing with that are maybe not like direct comrades, and be like, hey, heads up, you just shared a post by Rania Khalek. Do you know that she's an Assadist, right? And so when people kind of like on the spot, when people are sharing resources that are compromised resources that we know about, like a lot of people have been sharing the post by Answer Coalition and PSL around the upcoming march in DC. And so it's an opportunity to be like, hey, that's awesome. I'll see you there. Heads up, and then drop them contextual information, links from Fashbusters about what these people are all about, because I think sincerely people do not know. And if they're gently educated rather than like trounced on, I've had success with like 5 individuals. I'm just a small person, but if we start normalizing this, we can begin to get, you know, our friends who didn't know to be educated on it, and they can continue to further amplify it out. And I think it's going to operate on those 2 levels. Yeah, that's it for now. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, before I call on Clay, I just want to say that we will send out an invitation to everyone who registered for this meeting to attend the first official meeting of a working group, where, of course, we will continue to discuss the political issues, but also concrete actions that we can take. So, Clay, go ahead. Good to see you.
First, I want to thank you for holding this meeting. It's been very informative. One name that comes up in the nexus between Ukraine and Israel, Palestine, is Elon Musk. And I know people are familiar with the role he's played in Ukraine, where he first came in playing the hero by offering Ukrainians his Starlink internet service, and then subsequently used that as actually a weapon against the Ukrainians, and also came out with a very pro-Russian position. And now he's popping up in the Gaza Israel thing by offering the Gazans internet service in contradiction to the Israelis, and the Israelis are vowing that they're going to try to stop this. And I was just wondering what people think about this. You know, this billionaire coming in again and playing with an international situation, as it was.
I'm going to call, I just want to also bring attention to that it's, well, it's about 10 to the hour. We can go a little bit longer, but we do want to leave time for Vladislav to come back in, and because people will begin leaving the meeting. So I'm actually going to call on Joan, because she's not a regular attendee at these meetings, and then I'll circle back to Walter, Rick, and Brad. Joan, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Thanks very much. I want to, excuse me. Some of the points that John Riemann raised reminded me of what's going on in the north of Ireland, where I lived for a very long time during the war against British occupation. So we have experience there. A few weeks ago, a group of students from an Irish Catholic secondary school held a protest in favor of the Palestinians and what was happening to them in Gaza. They didn't need education. They hadn't lived through our war in the north of Ireland, but they knew, because they identified that their parents and grandparents and their community had been through a struggle against imperialism, and they recognized it. They didn't need to learn or be taught. They understood. Immediately after their little protest with their signs about Palestine, the major Protestant pro-British community came down on them and demanded that they be punished. And that's probably happening right now. So what I wanted to say was, you know, the people that are in struggle in the United States, they don't need education. Look at the people who are out on the streets, who are occupying the Capitol. You know, people who are already fighting against the nature of the American capitalist system. They're already with us. We don't need to go and teach people. We need to draw on that kind of support and broaden it very much more. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for this great presentation.
Okay, Walter.
Well, first of all, I have to say hello to Joan, who I knew years ago in Irish solidarity work. But what I wanted to point out was earlier in the chat, towards the beginning of this whole session, there was a statement published by the British Ukraine Solidarity Campaign. And unfortunately, I looked at it, and it's not a solidarity statement with the Palestinians at all. For example, it says that, quote unquote, Israel has the right to self-defense. It says it has a right to self-defense against terrorists, but it objects to the carpet bombing, the blockade, and so forth as methods of carrying out this self-defense. But I have to ask, and I'm sure many of us do, why should an apartheid state based on ethnic cleansing have the right to defend itself? And why should that be posted in this discussion? Its current methods of self-defense, I would say, are inherent in the nature of the Israeli state itself. So I lost the early part of the chat, so I don't remember who posted it, but I'd like to ask whether this post represents the British Solidarity Campaign as a whole, or just the individual who wrote it. And that individual was identified as being from a Ukrainian organization called SD Platform. So I wonder if any of our Ukrainian, Vladislav or other Ukrainian people here know what that group is.
So I can actually answer that question. So the person who posted that was a man named Leo. I don't think he's here anymore. He's left. And I had asked him because he said, oh no, the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign in the UK also stands with Palestine. But I agree with you, Walter. The article that he posted was an article, and it was not what I consider to be a solidarity statement with Palestine by any means. So the UK campaign has not taken a stand on that, and that was just an article expressing someone's point of view in it. So, okay, Rick, and then Brad, and then Vladislav.
Thanks. So, what I'd like to speak to is what ties all these struggles together, and the negative is racism. We clearly see that that Zionism as an ideology is fundamentally racist at its core. When we look at Russian imperialism, we see a different form of racism toward Ukrainians by arguing that Ukraine and Ukrainians don't exist. They're merely Russian subjects who speak some kind of dialect or something like that. We see it with respect to Palestinians, with what Edward Said, the late Edward Said, called Orientalism. We see it in Syria specifically, to how many Western leftists, people who had always stood with oppressed people, suddenly called Syrians head choppers. And the most vile forms of racist hate I'd seen in 50 years. And we see it with the treatment, both in, obviously, from the Zionist press, but now even more so from the US press, which shows white Israelis and contrast that with quote unquote Hamas, so that all Palestinians are now Hamas and all Israelis are associated with white, with being white. And this is probably less of a problem in JVP, but in JVP you have, of course, it's a cross-class organization that maintains the importance of Israel being maintained as a settler colonialist state. It has very close ties to the Democratic Party. And while it raises issues about calling for a ceasefire, it says nothing about stopping the genocide inside Gaza or the settlers' attacks right now occurring rampantly on the West Bank. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so before I call, so Brad, you lowered your hand again. Before I call on Vlad, I'm gonna John wanted to screen share something. John, why don't you go ahead and do that, and then we'll call on Vladislav to wrap things up. Unless, okay, I see Clay's got.
This is in response to what the comrade from Ireland reported. I was recently in Germany in a small little town on the border with Denmark, and there was a protest there for Palestinians. These are two young men, teenagers. They were Albanian, and I think their message really says it all. The first is in English. The second, it says, don't turn away, don't let yourself be blinded. And they didn't clearly have a whole Marxist background and stuff. They just clearly knew from their own experience what was right and what should be done. So anyway, I thought that this picture really says a lot.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, Clay, and then I'm gonna call on Vladislav, and then we'll close out the meeting.
Okay, let me be real brief. What I think is really at the core of all this stuff with regards to Israel, in particular in the West, is that obviously it has to do with Nazism and the Holocaust. I think at core what it is obviously the Nazis and the right wing in that area rejected the idea that European Jews could be part of the white race. And what the establishment of Israel and the defense of Israel in the West is about is apologizing for having rejected them as a part of the white race and welcoming them as part of the white race now. And that's where defense of settlerism in Israel, defense of Israel itself, the creation of it, and the support for it in most of the European capitals that formerly housed a lot of anti-Semitism, and now are apologetic for that. Formerly largely rejected Jews as part of the right race, and now wants to include them in that. And I think that's really the core where white supremacy comes into this. Jewish supremacy is being established as a sub-branch of white supremacy. Anyway, I just wanted to add that into the discussion.
Okay. Brad, have you fixed your audio? You want to give it a try? No, you have not. Yeah. So, okay. Vladislav, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to have final remarks, but I think I have moral obligation to say that nobody can take a right of self-determination of any nation, not Jewish nor Palestinian. And to be honest, I am a bit afraid of the discussions that went for the last 15 minutes. And I want that any nation, any people have their right for self-determination, even Jews. And I think it is an important thing to say. And I think that the left should build on the points of being against genocide and for the honest and objective human rights-based approach to everything that happens without double standards. And I think it is important now to be very clear against xenophobia, against anti-Semitism, against Islamophobia, and build our connections despite our difference on basic importance of humanism and human lives and human rights, and try to build connections on this, and especially in struggle of Palestinian people for their self-determination, for struggle, for solidarity with the people who were victims of Hamas attack, for solidarity with everyone who is suffering against colonial violence, against imperialism, and for everyone who is suffering now from settler colonialist practices. I think now is a great moment with all horrible crimes that is happening right now to build a movement that can accommodate all the struggles and connect different social, national perspectives for fighting for a better world that is based on democracy, human rights, and social justice. And thank you for this event. Thank you for everyone who organized it, and thank you for participation in all of these discussions. And I was really glad to participate in it. and say about what's going on in Ukraine. And I hope there will be a lot more solidarity between Ukrainians and Palestinians, because there are a lot of ground to create this solidarity. The only thing that is needed now is collective work and building these connections on which we can objectively support each other and support our basic rights and right to existence, and to exist peacefully without rockets flying our head, exist on our land free, without apartheid, without colonialism, and without authoritarianism. And thank you all, and have a good day.
Yeah, so before everybody signs off, I just want to, Marusia asked for just a little bit more information about the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign. We meet every Sunday, or almost every Sunday. We have a business or an organizing meeting at the same time, 9 a.m. California or Pacific Standard Time. Everybody here is welcome to those meetings. We also have pretty regular public forums like this one. And all of the recordings of those previous public forums that we've had in the last year and more are available on our YouTube channel. Megan, can you post the links again to the petition that we've set up on change.org that condemns President Zelensky's repeated unconditional support for Israel and other things, our link tree. And you can, so we will send out, as I said, we will, what else can I say about us? We have done a lot of work, and we will continue to do a lot of work. And we welcome all of your help and participation going forward on this challenging situation that we're easily found on Facebook. Just do a search for Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign and join the conversation there. We are also on Twitter. We are also on Instagram. Thank you to everybody that attended, and we will go forward from here and go to those demonstrations, wear Solidarity with Ukraine t-shirts and pins and signs. Speak up. Don't just go and blend with the crowd. Got to raise everything that we talked about here today at those demonstrations.
Mm-hmm.